What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Cory. I'm your host, Cory Smith, here to discuss some NC State men's basketball. NC State taking on Kansas, by far the biggest home game of the year, in the non-conference. Also, I would argue probably the biggest non-conference game, or at least we knew biggest non-conference guaranteed game going into the season against the number 17 team in the net, number 19 in the AP rankings, one of the best defenses in the country. Had to get Brian Geisinger on to preview this game. Brian, first of all, just your thoughts on this game, the importance of it, and what you're looking for the most in this one.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this game. This will be the third time I've seen Kansas play this season. This is the second year in a row. I guess they're going to play all of the Triangle ACC schools, right? Because they've already played Duke and UNC. I watched both those games, clipped both those games. Of course, the Duke game was sans Darryn Peterson, so State will get a bit of a different beast with the Jayhawks coming to town this weekend and having Peterson, probably at worst the number 3 pick in the draft, likely the number 1 pick in the 2026 draft, and the best guard prospect in the country. So very excited to sort of see where State's game plan starts out with not just like the Kansas offense as a whole, because of course, but really like how they plan to handle Peterson in the ball screens. So, State, they've kind of gotten back to after, the Auburn game, they were sort of hedging ball screens, switching still a ton, but hedging some more frequently on the 1-5 looks. I'll be curious to see what their approach is for Peterson. Are you, they're going to switch Van Allen Lubin and Sanye out on him. So how do those guys handle up in space? How does NC State work on the back end? Because the Kansas center, Flory Bidunga, has also shown he's pretty good at capitalizing against switch. Like he can face up, he can score in the post, he can get on the glass. So I'll just be kind of curious to sort of see like what State's plan is for handling that, especially when it's those two involved in the action, and what sort of like the secondary rotations off of that are. Like, is State going to try to scram switch on the back? Are they going to show early help? Does that open up, catch and shoot, kick out 3-point opportunities for a Kansas team that's not exactly like an elite shooting bunch outside of Trey White, the former Louisville wing, who's had a really nice start to the season. And he, to me, also feels just like a matchup piece that's going to be important. Like, I think you're going to see a lot of Trey White and Darrion Williams going at one another in this game. Two really good, veteran forwards who can score and play make. But White's a guy, if he can get, Trey Holloman switched on to him, if he can get a Matthew Abel, Paul McNeil, like he may try to like use his strength against some of those guys. And on the other side of the court, I'm going to be really fascinated to see how State is prepped and ready to take on what is one of the best defenses in the country, period, point blank. Top 8 in defensive efficiency, top 3 in the country in block rate. They've blocked, it's on about almost 19% of opponent possessions. Kansas has blocked a shot, and Bidunga leads the charge there for sure, but also Bryson Tiller, who's a really good freshman, sort of like hybrid 4'5", 6'11", 240, certainly plays a role in that as well. So really compelling matchup between these two, and a lot of sort of like fun one-on-one or scheme battleground areas to keep up with.
Yeah, I was going to say one aspect about it. You talked about still switching for NC State. Will Wade talked about it earlier today. He said we're going to switch a lot of guys on Darryn Peterson. Sorry, I'm getting them mixed up because we'll talk about the Darrion for NC State here in just a little bit. But Darryn Peterson, he said we're going to switch a lot of guys off on him and try to get different looks for him. I would expect to see a little bit more of Terrence Arsenault. He gave you a plus in that game the last time around. But you mentioned the 3-point shooting. Like this team has consistently been one of the best. Typically a top 25 perimeter defensive team, and you add on the fact that you have size down low. They're blocking a lot of shots. It's like they're almost trying to force you into the mid-range game, and I think that's why To me, in this game, it's going to come down to the NC State Darrion in this situation to try to be able to kind of create in the middle of this offense, and then free up some space for the rest of the offense too. But let's talk about that aspect just quickly. The disparity between the two sides, because you mentioned 3-point shooting for Kansas. I mean, yes, Trey has been having one of his best seasons from outside the arc, but also when Darryn Peterson has played, he's made 3-pointers in every single game so far. So he does stretch the floor for them a little bit more too.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he has the athleticism to be able to drive against bigs, against anybody. But he's also a great shooter from outside, somebody that can move the ball around a little bit. Doesn't average a ton of assists, but somebody that can really light it up from outside. And that kind of adds to what this team is capable of that we didn't see earlier in the year when they played against Duke too.
Yeah. I mean, Peterson, if you haven't seen him play, or for those who haven't seen him yet, I mean, he's super smooth, and he sort of is the like proto, shooting guard role, 6'6", 200 pounds, athletic, can play on and off the ball, can pass. And he is the guy outside of maybe Trey White too, like really the one guy that can force a defense to maybe want to put 2 on the ball. So if State's going to switch on him, which they clearly are, I agree Arsenault's a big piece, but like they're going to have people, shading over from the elbows and the wings and slots. And like he's going to be drawing attention wherever he goes offensively. But also like you don't want to get caught up in sort of like shading too much help in his direction. And then all of a sudden you let, Cole Rosario or Melvin Council, who's obviously had a really tough season shooting the ball so far, but is a good player. Like you let one of these, or El Marco Jackson, like you let one of these other sort of like role guys beat you. Like that would be sort of like a tough way to go out. So Peterson's going to get his. I mean, I think it's like a tale as old as time. It's like, he's probably going to get his. You're probably not going to be able to totally turn his water off. The question is sort of like how difficult can you make it for him to like work for that? And can you kind of keep everyone else in check and, veer away from having one of the other guards or wings hit 3 or 4 threes? And all of a sudden that just sort of like tilts the game and the math a little bit too much in the other direction. So big opportunity for a lot of guys, I think, to sort of like, show off their defense. And State has a lot of like-sized guys that are in that 6'4" to 6'6", 6'7" range that they can move around and switch out on Peterson. So they definitely have guys that they can cycle through and throw at them. But certainly, like, unsurprisingly, like, Kansas's offense is much better with Peterson this year. I mean, they're on the season, KenPom has them like just outside the top 50 in adjusted offensive efficiency. But according to CBB Analytics, with Peterson on the court this season, Kansas's offense is just above 1.3 points per possession. And that's not in a ton of minutes. Like, he obviously hasn't played all that much for Kansas this season. And several of, fair amount of those minutes are against, Green Bay, I believe. The only other 2 games he's played in were UNC and Missouri, but two quality, 2 really good teams, obviously. Missouri, not a great defensive unit, even with, Anthony Robinson, who's a really good guard defender. But so yeah, I'll be kind of curious to see sort of like how that stabilizes. We've talked plenty just through the first couple weeks of the season about, the upside, but also sort of the downside risk of how State plays defense and how some teams have been able to capitalize on that. But their approach, like, this is the kind of game where like it really could potentially work on, because as good as Bidunga is, he's not like a throw it into the post, 25 times and just let him like try to like work on a smaller matchup. Like, you're trying to keep Peterson out of the paint. So you're going to switch, keep the ball in front, and then send extra attention his direction, try to make him beat you from over the top. He's good enough to do that, but that's better than layups and in free throws, which are obviously the best place to get offense. The one thing I would say too is, like, as good as the Kansas defense has been so far this season, and really like they've made it really tough. Opponents are shooting just 58% at the rim against them, 35% in the paint against them on 2-point attempts that are in the paint, but outside the restricted area, in shooting just 31% on mid-range 2-point shots that are 2-pointers outside of the paint. So kind of a power outage, from all of those sort of like inside the arc finishing areas. But Kansas is also, as you can see, their opponents have shot just 24.9% on threes against them this season. So, not even a quarter of those threes. Like, Kansas is an elite defensive team, and their defense can like extend possessions and make you take tough shots late in the shot clock. They usually Bidunga is going to be up at the level hedging those ball screens, so they really make you work, and he's mobile enough to do that. But they've probably gotten some shooting luck. I've only seen 2 of their games so far this season. I would like to go back and watch the Syracuse, Notre Dame, Tennessee and Missouri games. I just haven't had time yet. But my guess would be there's some 3-point shooting luck baked into that this season. Opponents are shooting under 21% on corner threes against them, and they're shooting just above 26% on above the break threes against Kansas. So like, this is a really good elite defense that's very good at protecting the paint, and they put a lot of pressure on you in the pick and roll with Bidunga being up at the level and having the mobility and size to recover. But like, State, maybe State can also generate some good looks against them, because if they're putting 2 on the ball, that means they're in rotation. And if State can skip it around and move it and make the extra pass, they might be able to have guys like Matt Abel, Paul McNeil, those guys step into some catch and shoot threes with some space.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking back at the box score, obviously, the game, the way it unfolded against UNC, I think UNC was down quite significantly early on in the second half, but was able to make a comeback in that one. But interestingly enough, that was one of the games where Kansas wasn't able to get a ton of block shots. So UNC was able to drive on them and finish inside, because I think points in the paint wise, they did fine. They finished with 48 compared to 20 for Kansas. I don't think that's going to be the way that NC State's going to be successful in this game. So just in your assessment, like, what should be the game plan for NC State to attack this defense, and where do you feel like they can kind of find some ways to open it up a little bit?
There's a lot of different stuff that they can do. You saw in the Liberty game, I thought it was kind of interesting how much guard screening action they used. I tweeted this out the other night, but by my own charting, there were 19 half-court possessions, which is quite a good number of them, that involved a guard setting a ball screen for another guard or for Darrion Williams, in ways that were sort of like meaningful towards the actual action, not just sort of like a handoff, kind of like in the flow of offense. And so who knows, I'll be kind of curious to see if that was sort of a 1-game thing, or maybe that's something that might carry over and be a bigger part of the offense. It's something that Will Wade and McNeese State did last season. It's something that Adam Howard, their assistant and offensive coordinator, did when he was at Nebraska. Kansas doesn't exactly have like small guards to necessarily pick at those. So maybe that's a little bit less palatable. I do think if they're going to put 2 on the ball with Bidunga, you can look for Van Allen Lubin on the roll or on the short roll, try to get him going downhill, and then let him, he's pretty good when he catches in those pockets of space in the middle of the court. He can be a passer. You can have Darrion Williams floating around on the baseline or in the dunker spot. I do think also when they're going to put 2 on the ball, that puts them into rotation. You could run a pick and roll, get them in rotation. You either skip to a shooter, or you're trying to look to make one pass and then make the extra pass and get a swing and into a spot up 3. When Duke played them a couple weeks ago, they did have some issues handling like Cam Boozer pick and roll opportunities. The Duke got a bucket right before halftime where they ran like Cam Boozer, Isaiah Evans, like inverted pick and roll where Evans slipped out. He ghosted the screen and got into a catch and shoot. So maybe that's a way to try to space out a guy like Trey White or Bryson Taylor, like whomever might be guarding Darrion Williams, and you can have Paul McNeil or Matt Abel or Trey Holloman, setting those inverted screens and slipping out. So there's a lot of different stuff that they can get into. But for me, it really comes down to like, can you get Kansas into rotation, and then like how efficient are you on the backside? either stepping into those shots and making them, or like making the extra pass that's going to get into the extra shot. And I should say, it doesn't come down to just hitting like standstill jumpers. Like you heard Will Wade talk about before the Asheville team, about how he wanted this team cutting with greater purpose too. Well, if you get a defense into rotation, that's another thing that should sort of like light up for you offensively. So when you're able to bend the defense, get the ball into the second side, then you can also get some guys in motion, whether it's a strong side cut along the baseline or a weak slide, slot cut. Very interested to see how that looks. And I think State can get into it. There's a bunch of different ways we've seen a lot of 5-out action from them this season too. And so maybe that's a way to also pull Bidunga away from the rim a little bit, initiate the offense with Sanye or Lubin, and then get into your half court flow out of that. So a lot of stuff that they can try. It's not going to be easy though, against again, what's been by the numbers, a very good defense so far this year. Yeah.
I mean, and obviously I like to try to pick somebody before we go into games as like a pick to click type player. Usually I do that, leading up to the games with my, priorities and things like that. But you kind of already given plenty of the priorities. And I feel like, the biggest thing is finding ways to kind of pick apart this defense. Who do you have as a pick to click? And then I'll give mine as far as a player that you think could make a real impact in this game. It doesn't always have to be an X factor. It can be somebody that hasn't been playing as well or up to that level here recently.
Yeah. I honestly, it's a little tempting to say Paul McNeil just because of like these some of these 3-point shooting components we've talked about. He feels like such a ceiling raiser for them offensively, but having not really mentioned Quadir Copeland's name much yet, I come on here and I talk a lot about Darrion Williams, but Quadir Copeland, 26% usage rate, 36% assist rate. He's really their best source of rim pressure. He's a great mismatch piece against smaller opponents. But he also has an issue with committing fouls, 5.5 fouls committed per 40 minutes this season. They need him on the court. They need him getting into the teeth of the defense. They need him able to attack Bidunga in the pick and roll when he's up at the level. So I'm going to say Copeland, like a big game where you're getting like points, assist, free throw attempts, rim pressure. He's not dealing with foul trouble. And if he can just cut out that like the 1 to 2 sort of like head scratching turnovers, he's been much better with that over the last few games. His turnover rate's down to 18% this season, which is pretty good given how much he's on the ball. But so for me, I think it kind of has to start with, I think his performance so far this season is almost flying a little under the radar. I think he's been really, really good.
Yeah, I was going to say, he has averaged over 20 points per game, I believe, over the last 3 or 4 games so far. So, yeah, he's been ridiculously good. It's just we're all kind of focusing on, all right, when is so-and-so going to get going? When is, Darrion Williams going to get going? And I picked Darrion Williams in my last game, and I think that he will have a big game in this one. But my X factor or my pick to click, to get things really going, I'm going to go with the guy that you talked about, Paul McNeil. Over the last 3 games, he has not really had it going. He went 1 of 6 from 3-point range, or 1 of 5 from 3-point range against Auburn, 1 of 6 against UNC Asheville, but 2 of 4 in the last game and hit, 2 of his 3 in the second half. It felt like that was kind of all right, back home, being comfortable. Didn't finish with a ton of points because he was pulled out shortly after that. Only had 6 points in the game, but only played 17 minutes. He's played a combined, I believe, 35 minutes the last 2 games. So we'll see ultimately how much he plays in this game. And I get the feeling that he will make a pretty big impact in this one. We'll see who he's matched up against. Obviously, Darryn Peterson probably going to be somebody that he's matched up against in this one. How well does Peterson play defensively against him? Does he give him room to shoot from outside? How much do they kind of, switch around to get somebody on him that can kind of clog up those shooting lanes too? But I just get the feeling, we've seen Matt Abel kind of click the last 2 games, and I think he'll have a good game here. But I think this is a big opportunity for a guy like Paul McNeil. If he finishes with, somewhere between 12 to 15 points, and you get, the production that you've been getting from Quadir Copeland, you get a little bit of increased production from Darrion Williams, and then, other guys come off the bench. Vinal Lubin's been playing extremely well lately. I don't know if this is the type of game for him to have a ton of success, but if he can get things going down low, it does feel like a winnable game for NC State. And as of right now, I believe NC State's favored by 1.5 points. And all the metrics, you look at all the different websites, and then I know obviously Bart Torvik, Ken Palm all have NC State slightly favored in this one. Just your thoughts on how this one ultimately goes down on Saturday.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is Kansas, or my concern for State's perspective would be just Kansas getting this thing into the mud. State's threes aren't going in. Copeland's in foul trouble. Williams, for whatever reason, and he's just been sort of like hit or miss the last few games. The usage just hasn't quite been there. It'd be phenomenal if he could sort of like turn that around. And I think ultimately this has the chance to like be this is a huge opportunity for State, looking ahead over the next few weeks with several other top 50 opponents like Mississippi and Wake on the horizon, Virginia, not too long after that. I think it's a close game. Obviously I think the crowd's going to be huge. It's electric Saturday afternoon. Should make for a lot of fun. Likely the number one pick, in the upcoming draft in the building. I think it's a close game, and I'll just kind of be curious to see if State can, again, like kind of get enough stops, because Kansas is going to try to get this into the mud. I like where State's offense is right now, so if they're willing to get into sort of a rock fight, and they're willing to play that way, and their switching style on defense is on point, I think they absolutely have a chance to win this. If the defensive rotations and the sort of like physicality and the talk aren't there, I do sort of worry about how this thing goes for State. So I don't have an official prediction, but that to me is really like where this thing is going to hinge. It's just like, can NC State's defense like lock in on Peterson and be like in the other spots, correct? There are other spots rotating around on the backside, showing helping out in the post against Bidunga when he gets a switch, and then certainly like closing out to shooters. That to me is just the sort of like the main area of focus.
Yeah, I was going to say the only team, we were talking about it beforehand, the only team that's really been able to kind of drag NC State into the mud so far this season based off of they weren't a very good offense, but they were a very good defense with Seton Hall. Auburn kind of did that a little bit, but Auburn was explosive offensively in that game, hit a lot of threes in that one. Seton Hall was a team that just forced a ton of blocks in that game. I want to go back and make sure I get the exact number. Yeah, 9 blocks in that game, was able to win the rebounding battle. And I think Kansas probably will win the rebounding battle. That's probably not up for discussion, but where NC State lost that game was winning a lot of the margins by very little. You didn't shoot nearly as well, 42% compared to 52%. You didn't hit as many free throws, 16 of 22 compared to 20 of 24, going back to that game against Seton Hall. Like, you won a couple of those margins, more assists, less turnovers, things along those lines, but you didn't get out in transition. You didn't finish things the way that you needed to because their transition defense or overall defense was better. And I think in this one, this is a game where NC State's offense really has to come play, be efficient, just like they were in the Liberty game, and not as efficient against UNC Asheville. But it sounds like there was about 6 hours worth of practice in the 18 hours leading up to that game. So a little bit of a difficult scenario. The coaching staff dragged their own players through the mud in that game. So we'll see what NC State's capable of in this one. I'm going to go with, it's interesting. We were talking about it beforehand, like, the numbers and things like that. I think if NC State just does well in those margins, shoots free throws, the right way, you don't end up going, 11 of 20 or anything along those lines. But yeah, we'll talk much more about this game afterwards. But Brian, I appreciate you for jumping on, man.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Enjoy the game, being there today. That'll be quite the experience, and looking forward to talking about it at some point on the horizon here with you. It should be fun.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening.